Hey, kia ora koutou whānau. Welcome back to another edition of A Big Hairy News. Hope you're doing well, hope you are well, hope you're being well, hope you're still well, hope you're well. Well, well, well. Well, well, well. Now, first things first, let's check in with our audio for tonight. Let's do this as a part of our audio check. I'm gonna keep talking, but you just tell me if you can hear the music playing behind me. That'd be very good to know to make sure that we can get on with tonight's show. Tonight's show is gonna be a bit of fun, actually. Tonight's show is gonna be a show that has been 3 or 4 days in the building. Is that the right word? 3 or 4 days in the making, because we had some news come out on Friday about National Party, what National Party was going to do. Just waiting for someone to tell me that, make sure they can hear that music in the background. I'm turning it down now, by the way, because I don't need to keep it behind, just to let you know that you can hear it. If you heard nothing, let me know that as well, because that means I'll have to change the settings and make sure you can hear the audio that's being played. I'll play it again just right now, just to make sure people hear it or not. That was it. I just played a little bit there. If you could not hear it or hear it, let me know. We'll get it underway. Hope you're doing well. One of those days here in the Britton household, one of those days where everything, things are happening and things are going pretty well and things are ticking along fairly well. And then your car starts leaking coolant. And then you think, gosh, this looks serious. There's a lot of feedback had, really, feedback from me or feedback from the music right now. I'm just getting a sign that there's a lot of feedback. If you can let me know about that, Si, or anyone else who's watching, about the feedback. In my cans, it sounds absolutely fine, and so it would be good to hear from you. There's a lot of feedback on me. Well, gosh darn, I'm not entirely sure what to do about that. I'm not sure what feedback means because I can't hear it. I can't hear. It's a bit underwater. Okay, so what I'll do is I'm going to take myself off the screen and then I'll come back. Here I go. That probably shouldn't make any difference whatsoever, but let's see if it does. And not hearing the music either. Okay, so we're going to remove that. We're going to drop that. We're going to unshare the screen. Has that made any difference for the underwater bit? And now we're going to reshare the screen. Share the screen. We're going to take the little tabby tab thing. And we're going to go that one. And we're going to go share. Any of that made any difference? And tell me again. I don't necessarily want to put that up on the screen. So that and come off screen. And then play some audio again here. See if this made any difference. Music now in the background of what I'm saying. Should be playing now. Music in the background now. Music going down now. This is the problem when you don't have a co-host. You do it yourself. You might hear absolutely fine. And good healing music now for this side. Tell me something else then, Si. Tell me if you can hear let me pause that. What about me? Am I sounding fantastic this evening, or am I still sounding very echoey? Making sure none of my other things are. My speakers are down. The other mics are down. Here's the next thing, and I think if this is the case, I'll know what to do. Yes, it's on. The next question is, are you able to hear this? Let me push play on this. And I'm suspecting you won't be able to hear this. Here's a youth development worker. He has worked in South Auckland. I just played some audio between me stopping talking and joins us. Dietrich, good evening. Thanks for joining us, man. No, it's fine either way because I know what the solution to that is. Should you not have been able to hear that, I'll do it again. I'm going to stop talking for 2 seconds. I'm going to play something. I'm going to stop talking now. In and had to withdraw. The second time, and I'm going to start talking now. Could you hear anything between when I stopped and started talking? Yes, I can hear. This is such a bizarre system. I don't know what's going on here. I don't know. All right, guys. Good to be back with you. Yes. Anyway, thank you very much. I'm glad you all were involved in the producing of the show. You've all got producer credits tonight. Yes, I was just saying, it's one of those days. Things are ticking along quite well. You're looking forward to Christmas coming up. You're starting to think about kids' presents and, family coming down from Auckland to Dunedin to visit. And then all of a sudden, you realize there's a big puddle of water under your car in the garage, and you go, well, that's not looking so good. So you look at the reservoir on this that holds the water that goes into the first thing you do is you put your finger in the water on the ground and you have a sniff, and it's not oil. Thumbs up. You look at the reservoir in the engine bay and it's empty. Oh gosh, so we've run it dry. So let's fill it full of water. All good. You take the car out, you come back, take the car, and then you notice the temperature's going up. That doesn't sound right. You look at the reservoir of water as well, and no water's left the reservoir, but it's feeling very hot. So you think, crap, what's going on here? So you let the car cool down a bit because you don't want to burn yourself. And you end up realizing that the radiator is basically empty. So you fill the radiator up with 4.5 liters of water because that's how much it took. And then this was yesterday. The next day, you realize, let's check that radiator again, and you pour another liter in. And you're like, holy crap, I just lost a liter of water in about 12 to 18 hours with the car being stationary. Long story short, took the car in today. I have been told I have a cracked... the car that I've got, apparently a part of the cooling system, not the reservoir in the engine bay, but actually attached to the radiator. Part of it's plastic, which makes no sense to me at all, because why, with all that hotness around there, would you have something made out of plastic? But apparently it's a fairly common thing. So it's cracked. And so the radiator, the metal radiator is not actually cracked, but there's a tank attached to the radiator, not the reservoir, that is actually really badly cracked, and you can't replace it. So it means a full new radiator. So there you go. Christmas is on hold for a couple of weeks because there's another $1,000 to find from somewhere. But it happens, and you kind of go in with one hand, out with the other, and on we go. No, it's not a hose, Nick. I was hoping it was a hose, because where the water was leaking, I was like, it was leaking at the front right-hand part of the car, kind of under the driver's headlamps. But then I looked at it, and someone pointed out, underneath the car, there's all sorts of guards. So it could have dripped down here and then actually scooted along a guard and dripped off down there. And yeah. So anyway, I'm in a loaner car at the moment. I've gone from an SUV. And I'm in like a little Suzuki Swift. It's the most gorgeous thing in the world. And I do fit. I fit in it. It's quite lovely, actually. So anyway, I was saying before, this conversation is something that I've been wanting to do since last Friday. The story started last Friday. And we didn't cover off on it because we did the Libertarian night. And then on Monday, we had a couple of conversations, and so we didn't get to it then. So today, Tuesday, I'm like, everything else has been put to the side because we want to have a look at the National Party and what they had to say about two things. One is what they're going to do with youth offending, and two is what they're going to do when it comes to kind of kids attending school. That's really the big part of it. So we've got a couple of guests coming on tonight. One is a youth development worker from Christchurch, from Canterbury, who's going to talk to us about the best way to get the best out of young people. And the other one is I've already made the conversation. It's actually already on YouTube with a principal. He's the principal of the Tokerau Principals Association, and he don't mess around with his opinion on what he thinks of National's policies, and that will be coming up as well. But I think where we should start, and even though we've just checked everything and it should be working, it does make me a tad nervous with why we're talking about this. This is from News Hub over the weekend, News Hub Nation. Paul Goldsmith talking to News Hub Nation about youth crime primarily, not so much about the schooling issues. That was more the leader of the opposition. But let's have a listen to what Paul Goldsmith have to say about it now. And I'll be watching the chat in case this doesn't work. But this is from, I think, Saturday morning's program, News Hub Nation. And Friday is when the National Party made these announcements.
National's Justice spokesperson, Paul Goldsmith, who has been sitting here listening to that interview. Paul, tēnā koe, thanks for your time. Let's talk youth crime. So the minister says that a reduction in ram raiders, they are having intervention, investment into rehab programs.
That's an important point to remember. ram raids are reducing. Can I just say as well of the ram raids, whilst I heard a stat, whilst I've been looking through this, that there is a ram raid every 15 hours. So that's approximately 3 ram raids every 2 days. That I struggle to believe that number, because that would be 200 plus ram raids a year. Now, there may be a spate of that happening over a week. I would be interested to see what the ram raid numbers are over the whole year. I doubt it's going to be that number. But I think the big question for me is, why are there a lot of ram raids going on at the moment? And I would hesitate to offer the suggestion that there's a lot of ram raids going on, in part because the media is talking so much about ram raids, and that's giving a whole bunch of young people the idea, oh, so we can do this and get away with it. I'm not saying that's the only answer, but I would hesitate to say that's a part of the answer.
And your answer is to put ankle bracelets on kids as young as 10.
Well, look, I mean, the reality is that there's been a 500% increase in ram raids this year. And if you go to any shopping centre or talk to anybody working in retail, they're living in fear and really concerned about clearly no consequences for very serious offenders. And so, as the Minister said, and as the Prime Minister said, we need new tools to deal with what is a very small group of serious repeat offenders. And we're proposing new tools.
So here's a question, and the interviewer gets to this a little bit, maybe not quite as bluntly as I'm. National's proposing new tools by using policies that they've been trying to get through for the past decade plus. So I guess I'm wondering where these new tools are. I guess you could say, though, when like if you buy like I might have to, you buy a secondhand car, it's your new car, but it's not a new car. National is providing new tools by trying to reintroduce a whole bunch of old ideas that never worked, and research would pretty much be clear to say doesn't work.
Tools.
Okay, new tools. What is new about ankle bracelets? What is new about youth military offenders camps?
Yeah, it's a combination. So we're coming up with a new category, serious youth offenders.
So the reason it's new is because they're calling it something new. We're coming up with a new category. Just make sure you're clear on that.
Which is basically sending a signal to the justice sector to actually take this more seriously. At the moment, there's a spectrum from...
Follow the logic. We are creating a new category. We're giving it a new label. And because we're giving it a new label, we're signaling to the justice system to take it more seriously. Logic much?
Family groups, a pat on the head, we'll see you next weekend, through to juvenile prison. We're far too far down the pat on the head and we'll see you again next weekend end of the spectrum. And we need to push that along. And then for that small group of 15 to 17-year-olds, we want to have the option of sending them off, not to a boot camp, but to a well thought through year-long military academy, followed up after they leave that by intensive focused support.
So the criticism...
Now remember, he's not calling them boot camps, but he's also just said to us that they're relabeling them. So a boot camp by any other name, perhaps, would smell as sweet? I don't know.
The criticism is that it's been tried. All the reports say it doesn't work. And yet this is the third time that National is proposing this. Introduced once, scrapped, proposed in 2017.
It's a different proposal.
What's different about it?
That it's a longer structured program followed up by intensive support once they come out the other end.
So you're going to take...
So this is the important thing to remember with National. Remember, when National talks about Labor or the opposition, as in the Greens, sorry, their opposition, they say too much bureaucracy, too much money being spent, unless it's their bureaucracy. So they want to start up a new program, a longer program than they've hypothesized before and tried to introduce before, with a whole new way of doing things. Now, some could argue that's new bureaucracy, but National won't, because it's their bureaucracy.
Take these 15 to 17-year-olds away from their whānau, away from their community, and then just reintroduce them later on. After a year, you're isolating them even more and putting them all together.
They need a circuit breaker to get out of... quite often it's the communities and the families that are a big part of the problem here. And so what we need is an opportunity. I mean, you can't just keep on as we are, where you've got a very small group going out and causing absolute mayhem. And when you look at the eyes of the owners of these little shops who have been done over time and time again, we need to have an effective response in this.
Okay, something else that's really important to hear what he just said. It's a very small group. So if it's a very small group, why the significant focus on it? Now, I'm not suggesting that we just throw up our hands and do nothing about youth crime, that we do nothing about ram raids, but if it's a very small group, the National Party seems to be spending a disproportionate amount of time talking about it and beating it up. If it's a very small group, it should require a very small amount of attention or information or policy, right? Compared to those things in our lives that are very big issues, which should take up most of the time. But you'll find that certainly in the last week or so, and probably right the way up to the election, this will get a lot of attention, even though National themselves, by saying it's a very small group, are saying it's not that big of a problem. Because a very small group can't make a very big problem in general.
It's not what we're saying.
A child and adolescent psychiatrist has told us that this is the last thing that these kids need, and it would probably make the problem worse. Have you discussed this with those kinds of people? Have you discussed it with the Defence Force? Have you discussed it with, like, adolescent psychologists?
Look, this is a highly contested space, and there'll always be a wide variety of views. What we're doing is saying...
but have you done that? Have you done...
Look, we're in constant conversation with a whole bunch of people. When it comes to, you need to have extra tools. So this is not for everybody. This is for a small group and an option that the court can use. There's juvenile prison is one option. Sending them off to a youth academy is another one. Ankle bracelets is another option. There's different options available, but we actually have to have consequences for what is a very, very serious crime that has been committed and is causing mayhem in our streets.
So how many...
Now, Paul's beaten me to it there in the chat, but the next part of the conversation, I wasn't going to play this, but I'll just play you a little bit of this now.
So the youth camp, so boot camp, military, whatever you want to call it, is going to be about 60 kids, right?
Possibly, yeah.
Yeah, so $25 million for this rollout for 60 kids.
Could you imagine what National would be saying to a Labour Party if they spent $60 million, sorry, $25 million on 60 kids? Could you imagine what they'd say when... If the Labour government was spending $416,000 per child on any kind of intervention, the best part of $500,000 per kid, and it's $500,000 in basically punitive spend as well, right? Because it's a punishment. If Labour was putting $500,000 into these kids or into anything like that, can you imagine the uproar that there'd be from the National Party and how they'd be talking about wasting money? I wanted to play one more part from this conversation, and it's actually Paul Goldsmith talking about what he's hearing in the street. Have a listen to this.
There is a sense of a breakdown of law and order in our shopping malls and in our streets, and they want to see an effective response. And what they're saying, the message you get time and time again is there's just no consequences for these kids. And so we do need to demonstrate that we take this seriously, and there are consequences.
What is the...
So two of the points from that I wanted to really make clear to you is what he said very clearly was there is a sense, in other words, the people in the street that he's talking to, there is a sense of foreboding. There is a sense, and he also said, the message you get, meaning the message we politicians get time and time again, is there are no consequences. And what I would say to Mr. Goldsmith is, where are those people getting that message from? Where is that message coming from? Because I would propose that it's coming from the same people who are now saying these are the messages we're hearing, and it becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy, and it becomes cyclical. The National Party is saying no consequences, no consequences, no consequences. And now he's saying the message we're getting is there's no consequences. Yeah, because that's the message you're putting out, and people are hearing that message and giving it back to you, and then they're using it to justify their actions. And the other thing is, I don't mean to be disparaging to all of us wonderful citizens of this country, but we don't always know what's best when it comes to policy and governmental spend. So when you hear there is a sense, what that means is there's a vibe out there of X, Y, Z. Doesn't mean it's real. Doesn't mean it's accurate. Doesn't mean it's got anything to do with the actual what's going on. So National's basically saying we're going to make policy based on how people tell us they're feeling. And that sounds pretty woke to me, to coin a phrase that I never use. So what we're going to do tonight is a bit of a setup for you. What we're going to do tonight is we're going to listen to a couple of people who are actually experts in this. You know what we love to do here? I like being the dumbest person in the room, and let's get in people who know what they're talking about. So this afternoon I had a chance to chat to a couple of people. The first was a youth development worker. His name is Dietrich Soakai, and he works with youth. So this is my thing, yeah? My thing is this the best way to help these these kids. And when I say help these kids, I don't mean, oh, pat them on the head and say, you're there, you're okay. I'm actually like, they're in a cycle of something going on right now that's bad for society and bad for them. Ultimately, what we should want as society is for these kids, for anybody who's in a cycle of crime in particular, to be able to come out of that cycle and be productive members of society. We want that for society, i.e. for us, but we also want it for them, right? And so I thought, who would be better to talk to than someone who works with youth as their profession, who works in the field and can speak to, is the opportunity offered by National and ACT the way to get this productive member of society? And I rally a little bit at the idea of a productive member of society, because what the fuck does that mean? You know what I'm saying? Or are there better ways of doing it? And we had a really interesting conversation, right? Again, bear with me. If anything happens to the audio, tell me straight away and I'll come out and I'll fix it up and we'll move on. But right now, I'd like for you to enjoy this conversation that I had with Dietrich Soakai, youth development worker out of Canterbury. And he and I were talking, amongst other things, about National's plan for youth, especially kids who we're putting in that classification of youth offending. He is a youth development worker. He has worked in South Auckland, currently based out of Canterbury. Dietrich Soakai joins us. Dietrich, good evening. Thanks for joining us, man.
Malolele. Yeah, thank you. Thanks for having me.
No problems at all. Really good to be with you. Hey, we've been kind of skirting around this policy that National seems to be talking about. I don't know if it's a policy per se, because they have to be government to put that in place, as to what they're going to do with things like youth offenders and youth crime. And we thought the best thing that we should do is speak to someone who works in the area of youth. Kind of, I'm not an expert in this area. It's not my day-to-day life. With respect, it's not Christopher Luxon's day-to-day life. It's not his area of expertise. But when I want to find out what people who are working in an area think about something which is likely the best solution, we go to that area, which is why we're talking to you today. So thanks for giving us some time.
Oh, all good. Thanks for having me.
Towards the end of last week, the National Party has announced, as we can see here on this, I think it's a News Hub item, National Party announced that the party is going to try to highlight so-called tough on crime credentials. If elected, it plans to send 15 to 17-year-olds who commit at least 2 serious offences to military camps, while other young offenders could be subject to electronic monitoring or intensive supervision. Their potential government partner, ACT, says if people are old enough to commit ram raids, they're old enough to wear an ankle bracelet, according to ACT party leader David Seymour. The National Party has attempted 2 times before to bring boot camps into existence. One time they brought it in and had to withdraw. The second time they didn't bring it in. Now we're facing a third time with these kinds of ideas. And what I would like to understand, and I'm not saying we're going to have all the answers tonight, but it's a conversation, is when you face a situation of working with young people who are at risk, who are in a situation where their lives maybe aren't quite down the straight and narrow that a lot of us would hope our kids to be, what is the best way to make them productive members of society? What is the best way to help them be the best them they can be? Is it boot camps? Is it electronic monitoring? Is it using a stick? Or is there better ways of helping these kids get to where they could be, help them fulfill their potential, help them be, I know productive member of society is subjective, but you know what I mean, to be functioning adults and humans and an addition to our society. What are your thoughts?
Yeah, I think what I'm going to say is nothing groundbreaking or fantastical, because just anyone in the youth development sector, I think, would say that it's a strengths-based approach would be ideal. Being punitive in your approach to try and deal with the issues and behavior that these young people are displaying isn't the way. And I, in some respects, I'm like, okay, playing devil's advocate, I get it. There's like this sense of, there needs to be consequence. There needs to be some kind of, they need to understand consequences. I'm like, yeah, but I just don't think, I feel like you're kind of muddying the waters in a sense. Like, consequence is one thing, consequence for action is one thing, but in terms of like a developmental pathway, at least from my perspective, and I'm only speaking from my perspective,
Yeah.
a strengths-based approach is ideal because it's not deficit focused. I feel, and again, I just want to come straight off the bat. I haven't read into deeply into what National thinking about doing or proposing. I don't know, but just from the little headlines that you've read, and just from I think RNZ did an article as well on it. This is very reactionary, right? And part of it is like, oh yeah, because there's real things happening. I get that. From my humble perspective as a youth worker, man, like the issues are systemic. The issues are not. I just feel that it's so reactionary, that it's so band-aid like, that it's not really going to get to the heart of the issue. And the heart of the issue is not like, cool, we're trying these punitive ways of trying to control and ensure that young people don't continue this behavior because it impacts society 100%. Like, that's part of living in a society, is trying to be harmonious and peaceful, etc., and making meaningful contributions. But I just don't think approaching things from a real punitive way is actually going to help, because it doesn't. What is it? I think it's Gabor Mate says, don't ask why the addiction, ask why the pain. I think we just need to, well, there's probably many different factors and facets and ways of approaching things, which I think is, yeah, that's right, because humans are complex at their core, especially our rangatahi who are most vulnerable. They're coming from places that they have so much complexity that their 10-year-old minds, let alone they haven't even developed. Trauma is a thing. There's so many things here, and I just don't think. And again, we're just like headlining, right? We're snatching headlines from things. I personally don't think a military style boot camp is really a long-term fix. It's kind of like they need some discipline, they need some order. Well, what's the most order and discipline thing that we have institution? Oh, the army. Let's give them that. Like, that doesn't answer or give a meaningful response to the complexities that these young people are facing. And then the other argument is, oh, but is it our role to be doing that? Well, yeah, good question. But if you're kind of suggesting that it is your role by putting this forward. You know what I mean? It's like, where's the talk about dealing with poverty? Where's the talk about dealing with trauma and systemic issues that are pushing our young people to these things? And, you might be, oh, but, they've got a brain. They do the crime, do the time. It's not that simple, bruh. It's not that simple. These... and sad to say, some of our tamariki rangatahi mokopuna who are growing up in these systems are so institutionalized, sadly, because that's potentially what their whānau have been doing, and their whānau, and you know what I mean? So it's like just chucking them into, and I'm sure there's probably, I hope that they've got a more nuanced approach than just putting them in a military camp and slapping some electronic monitored bracelets on. I'm sure it's more nuanced than that. Well, I'd hope, but I'm just kind of like, fam, where's the discussion about trauma-informed care? Where's the discussion about having the young people at the center? Where's the discussion about dealing to the poverty and the issues that communities are facing? Because children aren't created in vacuums. Like, they come from their environment, right? Yeah. So what are we doing about that? And again, I'm no politician, I'm no anthropologist or anything like that. I'm just saying from my limited experience of youth development and community work, It's like, why are we not trying to address these bigger issues? It's almost like, oh, let's just hit the thing that's hottest right now. And it's like, dude, it's been hot for a minute now. It's been hot for ages. Like, we got to be smarter about the way we approach these complex situations. And then also a real fundamental thing to this as well, in my humble opinion, is the whānau. And I'm not even like I'm not even coming out here being like, oh, it's the family's fault. I'm not talking about fault. I'm talking about like restorative, redemptive. I'm talking about like healing. I'm talking about these sorts of topics that I think should be like, why aren't we working through that? Yeah. Anyway, I'll stop talking.
No, don't. Never stop talking, Dietrich. What you're saying is fantastic. I wrote down consequences, as you were saying, consequences. And I thought, what I see when I see politicians, people in front of cameras, certainly people of means and wealth, and people who have the ability to make choices freely because of the money they've got behind them, is they look to those in the areas of the people that we're talking about, and they relate consequences to how they see it. They relate consequences to like ankle bracelets. Whereas when I look at it, and I'm not an example of this, so I can't speak to it from personal knowledge, but I look to the consequences as in how their lives are. Like their consequences of their actions seems to be like, because they're saying there's no consequences. There's a shit ton of consequences, because the systemic issues around these teenagers, these youth, are affecting their every second of every minute of every hour of their life. That's a consequence. So it's not like there's no consequences. It's that the consequences aren't what these politicians want to see, but they're not acknowledging the other side of it, which is the massive consequences, even if they are committing ram raids, even if they are the kids that are the high offenders, in their lives, in their world, in their existence. The consequences they face are extraordinary and debilitating. Yet I don't even think till we can understand, talk through, acknowledge the consequences they're already facing based on probably systemic issues, that anything's going to change. So if they could change their view slightly to thinking that consequences are an ankle bracelet, and maybe look and say, maybe the consequences are to do with, let's just pick an issue, their health, because of the environment they live in their house, because of how the systemic issues are infecting the whānau, people with worse health outcomes. That's a consequence. But these politicians seem to be wanting to look at, for want of a better word, almost this is a colonial consequence here, and this is what they should fit in with, whereas there are consequences, but they're not addressing those consequences, which is probably more effective to get the outcome that these politicians are actually looking for.
Look, again, I would encourage anyone to do some research on this, so don't take my word as gospel. But what I've observed is when young people are institutionalized and introduced to institutions, more specifically the youth justice system and the criminal system, their likelihood of going further into the criminal justice system increases massively. I don't know the statistics on it. I just remember it's quite a high. The probability is like really, really high.
Yeah.
So you're going to go and chuck young people into this system that I would say a lot of people. Well, actually, hang on. That sounds real politician-like. In my experience,
Yeah.
there's the system's broken. The system's broken. So you're going to introduce them into a broken system to try and what are you trying to achieve by doing that? It's like it's so what's the word? It's not preventative measures. It's too little too late. Like, so what you're now going to try and ramp up, really put the heat now. It's too late, man. You need to go earlier. You need to be focusing on preventative measures, to give young people a sense of belonging, to give them a sense of identity, to give them a sense of that they have something meaningful to contribute to the world, like all of these sorts of things. I'm pretty sure gang members could even tell you that in their own language, right? So like, why are we're so reactionary? And it's like we as a society, as far as I can tell, we want blood. We want people to pay for what they do. You do the
Yep.
crime, you do the time, this sort of thing. But it's like, yeah, okay, do the crime, do the time, and then in that time, learn how to do more crimes and better and do it better. Like, what are we up to? It's like, can we please have a conversation about healing? Can we have a conversation about like restoring dignity and helping young people to see that there's an alternative way to the way that they're presented? All of these fear things about monitored bracelets and stuff. For some of our rangatahi, that's nothing new to them. They've seen their parents do that. Like, how is that fear? Oh, we're going to put fear. That's not putting fear into them. That's just like teaching them how to pick up more game and how to like work the system some more to be able to like, to do whatever it is that they want to do. Let's talk about what's driving them to do that. Like poverty, like all the other things that are like little tidbits I've said there. Like, can we please put the focus on those things, and more preventative measures? Yeah.
So if we're trying to scare them straight, that whole scared straight idea about kids by being harsher on crime, if they're not scared of it, if they're not fearful of those consequences, then it's literally going to do nothing, which leads me to kind of think one of two things. Either the policies are horse shit and aren't going to work anyway, or what these politicians are actually saying is we just want to lock them up and throw away the key. Like, we actually want to introduce them to the system and then we can get them off our streets and not have to worry about them. Now, that could actually be what they're saying, obviously, which I would reject vehemently. But when you're talking about putting people into a broken system, I was thinking it's like you're putting broken people into a broken system. And how can you expect an unbroken person who's already broken going into a broken system to come out the other end unbroken, other than, as you're saying, being more broken? Even Bill English, before he left politics in the after about 2011, referred to prison as the university of crime. You go there, you upskill, you learn more, and as you say, if youth detention and youth consequences are a funnel for prison, then if that's not the outcome you want, politician, then why would your big policy announcement, why would your driving force to get elected be to put them into that system that's going to make that outcome more likely? It seems ludicrous when you say it like that.
Yeah, and it just seems whack. It seems whack that you would want, I want justice from a 10-year-old.
Yeah.
Oh, but they've done like adult crimes. They've done crime. Like, yeah, okay. And I don't want to belittle that. Yeah, it's definitely impacting and has impacted many people. Like, I don't want to belittle. I'm not even trying to belittle that. But what I'm trying to say is, like, they're 10 years old, bruv. Like, why? Why do that? I would never want my 10-year-old son, if I had one, or 10-year-old child, to go through that, because I think any parent, like I would assume, who has their head on straight would be like, that ain't the one. That's not the way. And I think, for some of our whānau and some of our families, young people, children who grow up in families that are, as you say, broken, or have been institutionalized in their own way, knowing how to work, wins or work systems to be able to get what they need, essentially it's broken people who know how to navigate a broken system really, really well. How about we just help heal people and fix the system so that we don't have to. Anyway, I'm getting all like soapboxy, but I just feel that I just really feel that we're just going about this in such a reactionary way. It's like, oh, you wait till your dad gets home and then you'll know. It's like, dude, that's not helpful. Like, oh, cool, we're gonna put ankle bracelets on them and almost like a what do you call it, like a, to show that people have grown up. I can't remember that something path.
Right, like a maturing.
yeah, and they're like, oh, cool, like a rite of passage, like,
Right.
oh, cool, now I'm just like my dad or my uncle or that person I watch on telly or whatever. Like, that ain't the one. Like, we're just reinforcing, I'm just going to say this, and this is kind of like a tangent. I used to work, I've worked with young people in various different modalities, let's say. And one of the spaces was around mentoring. And one of the most impactful, powerful things that I observed in my brief time of working in the mentoring space was when young people who were, let's say, from lower socioeconomic backgrounds came into contact with, because generally most of our mentors were middle class, sort of upper middle class people.
Mm-hmm.
One, they had the financial stability to be like, oh, I've got time. When you're and that's no diss to those people. Okay, please, I'm not being facetious. It's just I just mean that quite objectively. One of the most impactful and powerful things I noticed from mentoring was that these young people, their worlds became enlarged by
Enlarged.
just
Yep.
enlarged by being with other mentors who cared about them. Sometimes, actually, a lot of the time, they didn't look like them, and they showed them another way. Conversely, that also happened for the mentors, where their world was enlarged, where they finally saw something different. And I just think that's powerful. That's friggin' powerful. Why aren't we pouring more like putia, more money into initiatives that are actually doing really good mahi with our young people? Why does it always have to be headline snatching, kind of like out for blood? Let's just pour all this resource into this thing that's going to make us feel like we're getting justice. What if this isn't about justice? What if the end game is actually about healing? What if the end game is actually about preventative measures? What if the end game is just about being able to change the narrative for our communities who are who are in the have-nots, so that they can be able to thrive? Like, yeah, I'm interested in that kind of thing.
It's a fascinating conversation, Dietrich. I understand you're in Dunedin at the moment, and I'm hoping that at some stage there's going to be Reburger for dinner. Because if you come to Dunedin, you have to go via Reburger. That's kind of a par for the course. That's a must-have. But look, thank you so much for joining us. A youth development worker based out of Canterbury at the moment, Dietrich Soakai. It's been an absolute pleasure to have you. Thank you for sharing your insights into this conversation. And yeah, all I can say is I hope that more politicians listen to people like you, and perhaps fewer people that think those tropey headlines are the way to get votes.
Yeah. Hey, appreciate the time, man. And yeah, apologies for all the soapbox moments, but you just kind of get all fired up because you care, right? And there's so many people out there who care about our young people and their communities. So yeah, thanks for your time, bro.
Alrighty, Mighty. Some texts that have been coming in. I'm also going to share something with you based on some of these texts. Let me just drag that across there. What has happened? Let's go back. I'll come back to that one last. JN says, there is a sense out there that has been reinforced by talking to the people inside our bubble. Yeah, right. Kookie says, you could actually argue that social workers are anthropologists. I was going to say 89 haters. No, it's 89 hatters. National base wants/need to see offenders punished, not helped. I think that's a really interesting point. Gary says, I remember 1980s ram raids on pharmacies that were motivated by restrictions on access to precursor substances used to produce home-baked heroin. And Lars says, treating youth like adults sound familiar. I'm going to share with you. If you're not following me on Twitter, you won't have seen it. Maybe you've seen it. If you are following me on Twitter, if you're not following me on Twitter, you probably should. I mean, it's, just probably should. I saw a clip tonight on YouTube that the politicians were being asked about lowering the voting age. Yeah. And Hariti Hipango National Party MP, said that 16 and 17-year-olds that, quote, psychological evidence, end quote, says they're, quote, not fully functioning, end quote, when it comes to voting. So there is psychological evidence, according to this National Party MP, that says 16 and 17-year-olds are not fully functioning. This is when it comes to voting, but when it comes to crime, National wants to treat them as adults, which would imply that they are fully functioning. There's a question mark at the end there, see? They are fully functioning. I really get frustrated when politicians, political parties say the opposing thing because it suits their needs, and that there's no one in the media that will go, hang on. If 16 and 17-year-olds aren't mature enough to vote because there's psychological evidence that they're not fully functioning, then surely logic would say, sorry to bring that horrible word in, logic, that you can't expect to treat them like adults when it comes to crime, because if they're not fully functioning based on psychological evidence that National Party member is offering, then they don't know what they're doing fully when it comes to committing a crime. Just a thought. Right. So the second part of what happened in the last couple of days. So on Friday, the National Party started talking about what they're going to do with young offenders, right? In the last couple of days, and actually we talked about this last week when Christopher Luxon was talking about various levels of leadership within schools, blaming principals for the kids not being at schools. So that has moved on to now National talking about what they're going to do in the schools. Now, you may have seen him in the media. He is the director of Te Tai Tokerau Principals Association, Pat Newman. And he doesn't hold back on sharing some thoughts as an educator as to what he's been hearing. And we're going to play that for you now. Let me also say I was talking to him in Wellington. He was on his cell phone and the reception was pretty shithouse. So there might be one or two maybe in the edits that I've made. Not that it matters, because I don't have to convince you of anything, but the edits were only because of technical glitches. There's been no content taken out of it, because that's not typically how we roll, especially on these shorter interviews. Isn't it funny? We think about a 16-minute interview as a shorter interview, whereas the rest of the media would consider a 60-second interview a shorter interview. All right. So look, we've just played you a lovely clip, and everything worked fine, but I will keep an eye on the chat. If anything happens to this audio, scream out and I will come back and get it fixed up. But this is Principal Pat Newman, who wants to tell us that Luxon has no knowledge of anything. He literally says that. I'll be back in quarter of an hour. And welcoming to the show, the president of Te Tai Tokerau's Principals Association is Pat Newman. Pat, with a fantastic name and a fantastic opinion. Welcome to the show, whatever that means. Hi. Hey, thank you.
One Pat to another Pat. Let's pat our backs. Carry on.
Perfect. Hey, look, thank you for joining us. This is a subject that I've been wanting to cover off basically since I think last Friday, but there's been so much in the news at the moment. It's kind of taken a couple of days for us to get to it. What I wanted to do is actually, because it has been ongoing, this conversation around, it's kind of started with what National saying they were going to do with sort of youth offenders, and it's kind of flowed into National what they're going to do with all these difficult school students. And I guess as the president of the Principals Association, you'll be a good person to talk to about that. What I'd like to do is start by actually playing an item off last night's News Hub. It's only 90 seconds, but that will give us the introduction to talking about what we're going to talk about. So if people haven't seen this yet, I'm sure you've seen this. This is from last night's News Hub. So it's, 28 hours old, but they're still talking about it tonight. And this is News Hub reporting what National is looking at doing within schools with policy they haven't put out yet, but I guess ideas for policy for next year's election.
National Party leader Christopher Luxon has added to his growing list of people who should take responsibility for the truancy crisis, and this time it's parents in the firing line.
The Prime Minister has slammed the comments, saying Luxon has oversimplified a complex situation for political gain. Here's political editor Jenna Lynch.
Pointing the finger at parents.
You chose to have these kids. You have to wake up at 7 a.m. You get your kids to school at 8.
Christopher Luxon has no time for excuses.
Now got subsidised, free lunches, free breakfasts, subsidised period products, subsidised school uniforms. There's no excuses. And what we have in New Zealand is a culture of excuses.
No, I do not agree.
Last week, Luxon put principals on notice.
There is a mixed standard of leadership across our schools and across our principals that actually means that they're not focusing as strongly on getting kids to school as they can.
After the latest figures show just 40% of children went to school regularly in Term 2 this year.
It's a social failure, it's a moral failure, and it's a future economic crisis.
A crisis he's now laying at the feet of parents.
I think that it is a very simple view of the world.
PM laying Luxon's comments, past and present, at his feet.
We've heard people called bottom feeders, we've heard teachers blamed, now we hear parents blamed.
Nationals talking tough on crime in response to ram raids last week, announcing it would bring back boot camps.
The only debate should be what works. And we know, because history's told us, boot camps don't work.
We are going to show some tough love in order to get them right on the right path.
Both sides talking tough, and the targets are everywhere. Parents, teachers, principals, but most of all, each other. Jenna Lynch, News Hub.
Right, there you go, Pat. So there's the story that's basically being talked about at the moment. National bringing out policy to talk about what they're going to do. Would they be government? Do you want to respond to that first of all from a principal's position? Would love to get your thoughts before we maybe go into some specific questions.
Yeah, well, look, to be quite honest, mate, it just shows that Luxon has absolutely no knowledge of, I'll say, anything to do with kids and teenagers. And that he's changing his view each day, in my view, because he goes back to his puppet master Seymour to find out what to say. And it's Seymour that's jerking the strings around this, and Seymour knows that little about education. It's not funny. But if a person wants to get up and pontificate, apparently knowing everything, you would hope that they would get things correctly. For instance, when he talks about the low percentage attending schools and saying how terrible it is, and it is not good, he forgets to tell people, or he probably doesn't know, that the figures are reflecting of children or students who don't attend 90% of the time or more.
So it's a 10%.
So what they're talking about
rate,
is you may have 88% attendance, so you go into the pile of poor attendance. All right? Right. If you are away at a tangi, you only need 4 days a term to be away, and it drops you below that 90%. So, he puts out these trite little comments, and he being blunt, he pisses me off because we're working our guts out to actually do something effective. We are doing something effective. And then you get this moron getting on television with his shiny very head. I've got to be careful what I say about his head, but with his shiny head trying to say that he knows everything. And what he's doing is leading into party politics, where National's going to adopt the right-wing Act's education policy and all the rest of it.
What I would be really keen to do is for you to stop holding back on your thoughts and really tell us what you're thinking. I think that would be
I thought I was.
So what you're saying, if kids are away for 5 days or more, they're considered in that 40%.
Yep.
So in other words,
in a term.
If you're sick for a week, and we're still in a pandemic, where if you get, obviously, if you're a household contact, you can still come to work, but if you get COVID, you must stay at home for 7 days. So that must have some kind of impact on still. It's not going to be all the absences, but it's going to have some kind of impact there as well.
Yeah, we're concentrating on actually being effective and moving those who are genuinely in that low truancy area. And we're not putting out trite things just to get votes, which is what Mr. Luxon seems to be doing.
Can I ask then, you're talking about focusing on the kids that are more absent, more than 5 days, 10, 20, 30 days, whatever it is. At what point as a principal do you start to get concerned about kids being absent? Like what Mr. Luxon is using that 4 being absent for 4 days being a huge warning sign. What do you actually use as an actual warning sign? How many days per month, per term would a kid need to be away for you to then start to get worried?
Well, every day, if a kid's not in, we contact the families either by phone or by text or whatever. So that's the first thing that we've been doing for a number of years, and it costs us a fortune, but it's well worth it. I personally look at 95% and below, believe it or not. And if someone's hitting 95% and below, then I start to ask, what's the reason? And most of the time it's genuine, okay? If you're hitting below the 70%, I'm really concerned.
Right. Okay. So you're not saying 80% is okay, but 70% is massive red flag warning signs, get onto it.
Probably kicking in before that, but that would be the one where I go into overdrive, if that's the word for it.
I'm interested as well in your experience as a principal, and you've been around for a while doing this, that how schools have worked under a national government. Because when I hear Mr. Luxon saying rallying against free lunches, free breakfasts, subsidised school uniforms and subsidised period products, I think, okay, so does that mean National is going to stop all of that and fund the schools in a different way? So if that's being part of the program now that's useful in schools, we haven't heard what National is going to do, but what's your experience of running schools under a national government?
Diabolical. It made me nearly give up the job under Hekia and them, with their national standards and their total lack of any educational pedagogy behind their stuff. Their decisions were done around political expediency, what would hold votes, what parents and people would think were good, not knowing the actual truth. And it destroyed my belief in what was great about New Zealand education. And it worries me because we're hearing that Seymour wants